It's a state with a tiny population. It is surrounded mostly by Canada and by sea. But suddenly the state of Maine is thrusting itself into the very centre of America's political debate. Welcome to Americast.
Americast from BBC News.
Hello, it's Justin in the worldwide headquarters of Americast in London, England.
And it's Anthony in the American headquarters of Americast in Washington, D.C.
And Anthony, we've had a question from Rob in Somerset. Why are you getting so animated about the midterms when they are 7 months away? Surely so much can change in that time, especially given Trump's unpredictability.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so, Rob. But the reality is that the candidates who are going to be on the ballot in November are being chosen starting really last month. Then that's going to define the contours of these races. So yes, a lot can change, and the party that's up or down can change based on the economy and the war and everything else. But the people who are going to be campaigning, the people who are making their pitch to the voters, we're finding out more about them now. And in finding out more about them, I think we're going to find out just more about the parties that are choosing them, what the Democrats are looking for in candidates and what the Republicans are looking for in their candidates.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's why we're going to concentrate today on a particular battle in the state of Maine, but also on a particular candidate in that battle. So he's not yet the Democratic candidate for the Senate seat in Maine, though it does look as if he is going to be that candidate. And he brings with him all manner of controversy, and he's a fascinating man in himself. And we'll get to Graham Platner in just a second. Before we do, though, Anthony, I was last in Maine when George H.W. Bush was president, and I have a T-shirt, the summer White House in Kennebunkport. At least I say I have a T-shirt. I think my daughter's borrowed it and she hasn't given it back. So if she's listening, she might think of doing that. But that was a long time ago. And my memory of it is that it's mainly forest and beautiful, beautiful, staggeringly jagged coastline. Am I missing anything?
No, it is beautiful country. I mean, Kennebunkport, if you talk to Mainers, they'll say that's downstate and that's practically Massachusetts. It's not real Maine. To get to real Maine, you have to drive. It goes on. And as you mentioned, it gets rugged. It is sparsely populated, very independent-minded people there who don't live in big cities and cherish their kind of outsider way of life. A lot of lobster fishermen, a lot of people depend on the sea for their livelihood, and a lot of people who move there or live there to get away from the rest of the 49 continental states.
It's quite a working class state, isn't it? Particularly inland, people doing lumber jobs. I suppose there's a bit of tourism. What else is there in Maine?
Not much else. Tourism, some vacation homes, heavy on the maritime industries. Also, as you mentioned, lumber. It is, as you say, a sparsely populated state, and that affects its politics. To be quite honest, Maine tends to go to the beat of its own drum. There's an old saying, "As go Maine, so goes the nation." But the reality is, Maine doesn't really reflect the mainstream politics. It likes to think of themselves as separate from a lot of the national politics, which is one of the reasons why this race is going to be interesting. Susan Collins, who is the Republican senator from Maine, she is the only Republican statewide in Congress from all of New England. So she's kind of like the last holdout, but she has been, over time, despite repeated Democratic challenges, very popular. She has beaten back Democratic challenges. In 2020, there was a candidate who was a member of Congress from Maine who ran against her, and she beat her handily. She's won every race she's had. That reflects that Maine is a different kind of state, even as it is a very important state, will be a very important state for who controls the United States Senate after November's midterm elections.
Right. Okay. So the Democrats then have a choice to make when it comes to who they select in the primary that happens pretty soon to be the person potentially with a real chance this November, you're saying, of getting Susan Collins out. And we should say Susan Collins is in her late 70s, isn't she? I mean, she's been there
early
since
70s.
Roughly.
Yeah.
Early 70s, all right. I apologize.
But still
for
old.
Early 70s.
Maybe not old for the Senate, not Senate old, but still, when there's been a lot of talk about generational change and the gerontocracy, she would serve, she said this will be her last term, but it's a 6-year Senate term. She would be in the Senate until she's 79.
Right.
So,
okay. So
that's...
So the choice the Democrats make then is between someone who is herself definitely in her late 70s and this younger guy. And it looks, doesn't it, as if they're going to go for the younger guy, this man called Graham Platner, who brings with him all manner of controversies and potential pitfalls, but is apparently very likely to win. What's going on then in the state of Maine when it comes to the Democrats' choices?
Yeah, it's been a fascinating race to watch because, as you said, he's a novice in politics. He's been an active voice maybe in some grassroots movements, but he hasn't run for elected office, I believe, certainly not on a statewide level ever before. He comes from an oyster farming background, which I talk about peak Maine kind of a job, and has played that up. He's ex-military, and as you also mentioned, he has a bit of a past that people have been digging through. He's made controversial comments on social media, on Reddit, including saying that women shouldn't get blackout drunk because it could expose them to sexual assault. He has a tattoo, or had a tattoo on his chest dating back to his military days, which kind of looked like, he's since had it removed, looks like a Nazi skull, and he only got it removed a few years ago once it seemed like he was going to be running for office, and he's made homophobic comments in the past. So, definitely the kind of history that you would think normally in a Democratic race would be damaging, yes, if not fatal.
Think one
to
of those things, at least. Yeah, one of them might be damaging. The whole lot of them would be terminal, but it's not this time round. And I'm right in saying, aren't I, that at the moment he seems to be doing incredibly well.
Yeah, I've been following the polls in this race, and he has had a comfortable lead pretty much throughout the past year, and a comfortable lead over Janet Mills, who is the governor of Maine, who is won statewide there, is very popular. I don't know if you remember, Justin, I think it was last year, Donald Trump invited all the governors to the White House, part of the National Governors Association meetings. And it was Janet Mills, who was in Washington, D.C. last year for the National Governors Association meetings. They got into a spat with Donald Trump in the White House. And we can listen to a little bit of it now, but it definitely elevated her platform nationally.
Is Maine here, the governor of Maine? Well, are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports. So you better comply because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding.
See you in court.
Every state, good, I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one. And enjoy your life after governor because I don't think you'll be in elected politics.
Well, he might be right, actually, on that. That was a row, of course, about whether biological males should play in girls' sports, an issue where, frankly, she is probably not in the majority of American thinking, but it's an issue she chose to have a fight with the American president in quite early in his term and very publicly. And it was the fight, it seems to me, Anthony, rather than the issue that mattered to her. The fact that she could be seen to be standing up to him and doing it really obviously and doing it kind of forcefully. And that really mattered to her. And that's why she thinks that she can be the candidate this time round, that she is the sort of anti-Trump. She's able to be forceful with him. She's run the state, et cetera, and that's her pitch. It is interesting, isn't it, though, that she is backed by a lot of the party bigwigs. So you think of the minority leader, the Senate leader, Chuck Schumer, but also other moderates, if I can put that word in inverted commas, like Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky. So a Democrat who is used to winning and able to win and win well in a broadly Republican area, which obviously Kentucky is. So that sort of wing of the party is very much falling in behind her, but frankly, it doesn't seem to be doing her any good.
Not doing her any good in Maine. On paper, she looks like the perfect candidate, right? I mean, she has won statewide in Maine. She has stood up to Donald Trump, as you mentioned, which is something that a lot of Democrats seem to like. She has a capability of raising money up for this race because she has established fundraising networks. And so you can see why people like Chuck Schumer and Andy Beshear and the rest of the Democratic establishment think that she would be the perfect one to knock off Susan Collins, who has had a stranglehold on the seat for quite some time. I think maybe voters in Maine are wanting to try something different. I think the other big issue, as we've alluded to already in this race, is the issue of age. She will be 79 on Inauguration Day in 2027. She's 78 right now. So she would be serving into her mid-80s if she wins this seat. Graham Platner, I believe, is 41. So the contrast there for Democrats, and that's something I've heard over and over again as I've been traveling around the country this year and last year. The concern for Democrats is they want new blood, new generation. And I think that is definitely helping Platner in this, as well as the fact that Platner is kind of an iconoclast, someone different, someone who tells it like it is, who says things that are controversial, but like we've seen with Donald Trump, that can be a benefit. Saying what you think and saying things that sometimes ticks people off, that wins over voters because they don't think that you're a professional politician, that you're modulating your message just to win their vote. So it has been an interesting kind of demonstration of these cross-currents in the Democratic Party.
Well, let's hear a bit from him, starting with his campaign ad.
My name is Graham Platner, and I'm running for U.S. Senate in Maine to defeat Susan Collins. A decade of military service going overseas, farming oysters to feed my community, diving to lend a hand to other fishermen, trying to start a family. But everywhere I've gone, it seems like the fabric of what holds us together is being ripped apart by billionaires and corrupt politicians, profiting off of destroying our environment, driving our families into poverty, and crushing the middle class. I did 4 infantry tours in the Marine Corps and the Army. I'm not afraid to name an enemy, and the enemy is the oligarchy. It's the billionaires who pay for it, and the politicians who sell us out.
Right, so he's very much an economic populist, to put it mildly, and he's backed, isn't he, by Bernie Sanders, who everyone will recognise, the former presidential candidate himself, who's on the progressive left of the party, by Elizabeth Warren too, isn't he? So he's got heavyweight backers of his own on the left of the party. But the thing that really strikes you about that advert, as you were saying, Anthony, he is a non-politician politician. He has nothing to do with politics or the political process. He is coming from another place. And that is the fascinating thing, isn't it, about the choice that the Democrats are making in Maine, and why this choice does matter for the whole nation, doesn't it? Because it's a choice in a way a bit like the Zohran Mamdani choice. I mean, they're not the same person, and it's not the same setup by any means at all. But you just throw everything that you've got out of the window, and you start again, and you say, I want a communicator, and I want someone who excites people. And that, above all, never mind the policies, that above all is what matters.
Yeah, and that sells in Maine in particular. There's a congressman, he's retiring, he's leaving Congress now, but represents the rural half of Maine, Jared Golden, who is not Graham Platner. He's a centrist, a moderate, but he presents similarly. He's ex-military. The first time I met him was at a reception, and he was standing there with holding a can of beer with his youngest baby in a Bjorn on his chest, and he was wearing short sleeves and had an arm sleeve of tattoos going all the way up to his shoulder. And I did not recognize him as a congressman, but he's the kind of guy who can win in Maine, and that Mainers seem to connect with. So in that presentation, in the style, if not the political substance, those are two people who seem to have really caught the eye of Maine voters.
Let's listen to what Graham Platner himself says. So this is him defending himself against these criticisms, defending himself against those who are attacking him for the things that he has done in his past, starting with his comments on sexual assault. And he was talking to Pod Save America last year.
I am not a secret Nazi. Actually, if you read through my Reddit comments, I think you can pretty much figure out where I stand on Nazism,
Right.
And anti-Semitism and racism in general. I would say a lifelong opponent. In 2007, I was a machine gun section leader with Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 8th Marines. We were on the 2-2 Mu, and it was my 3rd deployment. My previous 2 had been to Fallujah and then Ramadi, 2006. And we went ashore in Split, Croatia, myself and a few of the other machine gun squad leaders. And we got very inebriated. And we did what Marines on liberty do, and we decided to go get a tattoo. And we went to a tattoo parlor in Split, Croatia, and we chose a terrifying looking skull and crossbones off the wall because we were Marines, and skulls and crossbones are a pretty standard military thing. At no point in this entire experience of my life did anybody ever once say, "Hey, you're a Nazi." It never came up until we got wind that in the opposition research, somebody was shopping the idea that I was a secret Nazi with a hidden Nazi tattoo. And I can honestly say that if I was trying to hide it, I've not been doing a very good job for the past 18 years.
The thing that fascinates me there, Anthony, is when he says opposition research, he's actually talking about Janet Mills, isn't he? So the viciousness with which the fight has been fought on the Democratic side, certainly by her against him, has taken some breaths away.
Yeah, and I think it's a reflection of how high the stakes are here. This is a Senate seat that the Democrats really need to win if they want to have any hope of taking back the United States Senate. They'd have to flip 4 seats, and the 2 that are the most obvious are North Carolina, which the Democrat former Governor Roy Cooper, is doing quite well in, and Maine. And then you have to start looking at places like Texas or Alaska or Ohio or Iowa, so it's much more slim pickings. Maine has got a big target on it. So the Democrats really want to win this, and this is bringing up all of that debate about what a winning candidate in this party looks like in 2026. Janet Mills is an experienced politician. She, I'm sure, wants to win this seat. She has people who think that she's the best candidate. She says she's the best one to take on Trump. But then you also have progressives who are seeing this as a line in the sand. This is their chance to capitalize on the victory of Zohran Mamdani that you mentioned, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, other prominent progressives, and not only to be able to notch a win, but to notch a win in a swing state, in a battleground state, to show that their populist economic platform can be one that can win key races for the Democrats, and they're not going to be tanking this. They're not going to. This is not some sort of an ideological battle. This is a practical battle that they can win.
Okay, so the stakes are high, but even when the stakes are high, I must say, I'll ask you this in a second, Anthony, but it really surprised me when I was going through some of the ads that Janet Mills has put up against Graham Platner, just the viciousness, the personal attack of it all seemed to me to be, well, if not off the scale, then highly unusual. And you might tell me in a second that I'm wrong in this, but let's just listen to one of the attack ads that Janet Mills has been playing again and again on television in the state of Maine about her opponent.
Did you know Graham Platner wrote that women worried about rape need to, quote,
not get so up they wind up having sex with someone they don't mean to.
It's disgusting.
Platner wrote to avoid rape, women should, quote,
act like an adult for sake.
Graham Platner, seriously.
We blame the victim.
That's a horrible thing to say.
Disqualifying.
I have not seen this.
He's a bully.
This guy gives off a vibe.
Just no way I could vote for you.
No.
Graham Platner, the closer you look, the worse it gets.
I'm Janet Mills, and I approve this message.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty vicious attack ad. I mean, I've seen a lot of campaigns and a lot of nasty attack ads. That is definitely up there. They're using his words against him, and part of the reason is that Platner is a political novice, and he's running on who he is as much as what he wants to do. I mean, we heard the ad he had before talking about being an oyster farmer, talking about his military background. So I think the the playbook for taking down someone who is running on their personality, on their character, is to go straight after that. Now, is this going to be one of those instances where the two of them tear each other apart? And Platner, if he does win, and it looks like he's going to win the nomination, is so damaged that Susan Collins is going to be able to again coast to victory. I mean, that's definitely a possibility. And I don't know what Democrats here in Washington, people like Chuck Schumer, are thinking about this, but they have to start wondering, how much can we let Platner get bloodied up if none of this is making a dent on him? We need to start focusing on taking on Susan Collins.
Right, Anthony, that is a great moment at which to bring in someone who knows Graham Platner actually a lot better than either of us do. Josh Keefe is on the line. He's a reporter for the non-profit Maine Monitor. Even more important than that, Josh actually went to school with Graham Platner. Josh, hello.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Good. Thank you so much for coming on. What was he like at school?
He was sort of a rebel. He was a kid who had a lot of strong beliefs very early. I was in classes with him, and he would bring up geopolitical conflicts that I don't think any of us had heard of. I think he was probably the first person I ever heard reference Chechnya. He ran for class president. I remember he had like overalls and a red armband. It was kind of like a joke, socialist revolution type of thing. We voted him most likely to start a revolution in our senior yearbook,
which maybe he's doing.
Yeah. He put that out there, that yearbook picture, early on in his campaign, which is funny to see that kind of go viral and have the yearbook, in a box under your bed somewhere.
But it's interesting already, Josh, we're getting a picture because we've just been talking about how he comes from outside the political tradition and he hasn't run for office before and he was a soldier and a Marine and all the rest of it. But actually you're saying when it comes to taking an interest in kind of public life, he's been doing it since he was quite young.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because it's, I think when we're the same age. Me and Graham were 41. And I think, you haven't seen somebody for 20 years and you hear they're running for Senate. I think a lot of people would think back to that high school version and say like, oh, that guy, like, how's that? But I think for all of us who like went to school with him, seeing him now, it's like, yeah, of course, like that makes perfect sense. That's the same guy we remember.
I wonder if it's not just that he's authentic, Josh. It's also that he is damaged. And as he himself says, he's in pain. He's a veteran. He suffered from PTSD. He's got this kind of side to him that is raw and ragged and damaged. And I just wonder whether that actually is the key to his popularity in Maine and potentially more widely as well.
I think, it's interesting you say that. When I ask people, voters about, his controversies, the tattoo, some of the offensive Reddit comments, they often reply by talking about themselves, right? So it's like, oh, that tattoo? Yeah, I have dumb tattoos. I get it. Yeah. I've said dumb stuff. And I think it really helps paint a picture of somebody who's not a politician, who's kind of one of us, who's broken and made mistakes and hasn't been trying to live their life to build a political resume because he hasn't.
God, I mean, that really, when you use those words, I'm just thinking about Donald Trump. And I'm thinking not really about 2024. I'm thinking about 2016 and all those people who, many of whom had never voted before, who came out for him and has said, yeah, I know he cusses and he says all sorts of things and he's got these weird things in his past and he's behaved badly with women and all the rest of it. But hey, he tells it like it is. He tells our story, feels our pain. And there is a similarity there, isn't there? Maybe it's just in Trumpian times. This is a candidate that can work.
Well, I think, and Platner talks about this. He says, the reason Trump has been successful is because he is identifying frustrations that people have with the system. They feel like that there is, an elite in this country that is sort of screwing them, right? And Platner says Trump is right about that. He's just identifying the wrong groups of people. I mean, Trump is blaming immigrants and trans people, for example. But you know, because the Democrats have allowed that pain to kind of exist in a vacuum and haven't identified the enemy, you know, people turn to that explanation. So what Platner is saying is, listen, we need to identify who is actually harming the working class. And, you know, he argues it's corporate interests, it's the rich, it's the wealthy. It's kind of the Bernie Sanders explanation.
Justin and I were talking about Janet Mills and her resume. I mean, she's the kind of candidate that looks great on paper. She's won statewide in Maine, a long record of public service. She stood up to Donald Trump in the White House last year. Why is she not catching fire, or is it more that Platner is than any specific failings of hers?
I mean, it's really hard to talk about this race and not talk about the age issue. Right. Janet Mills will be, if she's elected, she will be the oldest freshman senator in American history at 79 years old. And I think in a post, you know, Joe Biden world, that's just really tough to overcome. You know, I've been struck by how many voters I've talked to, older voters, who really like Janet Mills, who think she's been a great governor. They say, you know, I love Janet Mills. She's done a great job in Augusta, but I think it's time for some new voices. I think it's time to sort of turn it over to the younger generation. But the other thing, though, I think is what I've been struck by is she kind of is running this campaign that I'm going to stand up to Trump. You know, it's sort of it's a little bit of a Trump-focused campaign. What Platner's saying is listen, we need to create a society where a Donald Trump can't happen. As in, we need to create, we need to support the working class and support working people in this country so the anger isn't there that gives the fuel to Trumpism. And so I think it's sort of Platner's offering this kind of post-Trump vision of the Democratic Party. And I think Mills is continuing to sort of fight Trump, you know, quite frankly, in a way that Democrats have done for a while now, and it hasn't really worked.
The other thing that really strikes me about Graham Platner and his platform, and we've said he's an economic populist, et cetera, but when you look at what those economic populist policies are, they are things like universal healthcare, aren't they? Universal education all the way through to university, all the kind of things. It's a sort of European style stuff that the Democrats, if they can marry that, which you sort of associate with the metropolitan side of the party and the progressive left kind of trendy side of the party, the right on, the woke side of the party, if they can marry that with a guy who's got a questionable tattoo and all sorts of previously questionable views on all sorts of groups, including women and gay people and all the rest of it, if they can marry all of that together, that kind of rough, ready side, that's a model of a sort, isn't it? Not just in Maine, in other places where they need to appeal to working class rural voters who are the ones who they've lost in recent years.
Yeah, I mean, Platner's argument is that if you just focus on people's material needs, you can win over a lot of the sort of Trump voters, you know, a lot of the middle, a lot of the working class. I mean, his argument is that Democrats have abandoned the working class. And, you know, I think there's a lot of Democrat consultant talk or whatever about how do we woo the working class back? What's the message, you know? And what he's saying isn't that we need to woo the working class. Like, he's openly saying the working class needs to take over the Democratic Party and use it to build power.
That was fascinating, Josh. A real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and to bring us information, not just as a journalist, but also, well, as you say, you haven't known him for some years, but you knew him when you were young, and that was fascinating as well.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
That's it for today. If you want to listen to any of our other episodes, you can find them wherever you get your podcasts. Bye-bye.